This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we find out what scares one Hollywood screenwriter silly. We talk to radio superstar Clay Travis about his American Playbook and why the Republicans must make this one issue their calling card next year. And we share the media's latest attack on Heartland USA, and I think we all saw it coming.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we start, I hope you'll subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, and while I'm being bold, maybe hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel too. Every new Hitcast will be there, and in the coming weeks, I'll be serving up original videos. Lights, camera, Toto! Jim Agnew isn't a household name like Spielberg or Scorsese or Tarantino. He's just a working Hollywood screenwriter. It's not so bad. Really hard to get that gig, and his credits include The Capture and Raid with Nicolas Cage. We all love Nicolas Cage. Jim also happens to be a white male, and I'm going to guess a straight white male based on what I'm about to share. Jim recently joined the Film Thread podcast, which, by the way, I highly recommend. Chris Gore is great, along with Alan Ng, and he was talking about the dueling Hollywood strikes and giving us an insider's perspective. He had a lot of smart things to say, the kind of things you can really grasp when you're in the belly of the beast. Jim also spoke openly about life in Hollywood, and again, it seemed like he was an open book, and that's refreshing. Except one question stopped him cold, and Jim's open nature suddenly slammed shut. Here's that moment.
Musophonic Recordings says, do you feel any of the hostility being shown for white males in your profession?
Pass.
What would you pass?
Just pass on that question.
Okay, you're not getting any pushback at all, like just for being a white dude?
Pass.
Okay, all right. That's a
privilege not working out for you. Is that what?
Yeah.
So what do we just hear? Fear. It's pure, unadulterated fear. You can't speak out against the woke bylaws in Hollywood, especially if you're a white male or even a straight white male. Again, I'm assuming his heterosexual nature, but I think it's a fair bet. If you don't have an A-list resume, you don't have major awards on your mantle, you just can't speak out. Jim, who was so nice, so open, so honest with Film Threat, all of a sudden that question came along and he clammed up. And I mention all this because I don't want you to forget what's happening in the culture at large, and of course, for what we do here, Hollywood in particular. You will obey. You will follow the rules. And if you don't, you will be in trouble. I think Jim knows that. And sometimes it's not what you say, but your silence that speaks the loudest. Clay Travis didn't have big shoes to fill when he replaced the late Rush Limbaugh on stations nationwide. Think clown shoes worn by Andre the Giant. Huge. And to Clay's credit, alongside Buck Sexton, he did just that. The Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show could never replace the irreplaceable. The show is still a worthy successor to Rush, I have to say, and he does one thing better than El Rushbo. Clay, and often Buck too, they've got a better grasp of pop culture, and that's refreshing. It's why I jumped at the chance to invite Clay on this show, and my timing worked out perfectly. Clay is currently promoting his excellent American Playbook, available in fine bookstores everywhere. It's a wise and witty look at the 2024 campaign. Yeah, it's coming around the corner. And how Republicans can win in a landslide if they just follow his advice. He makes plenty of great observations, some unifying points too. And while I really hope that this show has as many left-leaning listeners as possible, we got to get Team Biden out in 2024. Just on a free speech issue alone, got to go, sorry. But how? Well, that's where Clay Travis comes in and his American Playbook. He's got some compelling answers along with some life lessons and even a few tips for wannabe writers. I like that part quite a bit. Didn't expect it either. Now, of course, we know Clay, he created a media empire with Outkick, which is the sane alternative to ESPN, the uber woke ESPN, I should say. But now Clay is a nationally syndicated talker and someone who gets the political scene better than most of us. I couldn't be happier to pick his brain and get his thoughts on not just politics, but comedy, free speech, and much more. I hope you enjoy this chat with Coach Clay and his American Playbook. Clay, American Playbook had me won over early. You wrote that Republicans have to become the party that defends jokes, which sounds very basic, but you know it's really controversial now. Can you expand on this a bit and show how campaigns can lean into that messaging as the election season heats up?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. Second, look, you're not going to love every joke that a comedian tells, but to me, what the Republican Party needs to lean into as its foundational base now is First Amendment free speech and the marketplace of ideas. And so a big part of that is the creative industries. And as you well know, and it's crazy to even think about that we're here, but Hollywood has become a stultified arena where free speech is not where it used to be. I have a friend, and he's a really interesting guy. And he said, when you think back about the history of Hollywood, what made Hollywood so successful was it was a city for eccentrics, for people outside the normal bounds of quote unquote normal behavior. And what was so interesting was that dynamic, creative zeitgeist helped to spawn an incredible array of creativity. And what you see now is people are worried about what words they use. People are worried about what jokes they make. And that's the antithesis of creativity. And as I always say, and I think it's important, the difference between art and propaganda is art is rooted in nuance. If there is no nuance, then you're typically talking about propaganda narratives. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what Hollywood's producing now is propagandistic in nature.
Yeah, and it also breaks my heart that they're not only on the sidelines when it comes to the free speech fight, they're often on the wrong side of the battle, which is just shocking
to me. Point.
Obviously,
no, it's 100% right.
You fought cancel culture a few times, of course. CNN and BoobGate is the most prime example. You showed how phony cancel culture is, and you don't apologize because it's never accepted. But the average person doesn't always have the platforms you do, or the ways you can fight back. Any recommendations for what they can do? The average person, if they get caught up in something that's cancel culture worthy, because it's not easy, and it doesn't always have a happy ending.
Well, I mean, I think there's a big difference between the average guy or girl out there who's making $70,000 a year and they're trying to pay their mortgage and they're trying to make sure that their kids can afford to go to college, and what they face versus what someone who is truly economically self-sufficient faces. I would say if you're fortunate enough to have the resources, the idea that you would ever apologize if you are wealthy is laughably absurd to me. And I don't mean, by the way, refuse to apologize if you truly misspeak or say something that you didn't intend. Certainly that's different than this. But I mean, when you say exactly what you mean and your opinion just happens to make some people uncomfortable, to me, the people with resources have to set the standard for what is and what is not permissible. And I think probably the single worst precedent that we have set associated with all of social media is this idea that if you say something outside of work, that it somehow implicates what your employer believes. I don't understand that at all. First of all, large businesses are made up of a huge variety of people with a huge variety of different opinions, just like any other large group of people would be. And if it's not, then you probably are in trouble because you have no diversity of thought, which is a sign that I believe your company is going to struggle in the modern era. But I've been arguing this for years now, whether it was Kurt Schilling back in the day at ESPN or Jamel Hill, who have different political perspectives from the world of sports. But why should you not be able to have whatever political opinion you want outside of your work hours? Now, I think it's different if you're on air or you're at work, but the analogy I've used for a long time is I understand why, if you're a UPS driver, you wouldn't want your UPS driver, for instance, or FedEx or whatever delivery service, Amazon you have, to walk up with like a lapel pin supporting the Democrat or Republican Party, or having a bumper sticker on the back of your car that gives strong support for one political party or the other. But if you pull in your car and you have bumper stickers on it, or you have political paraphernalia inside of it, and you leave that car parked there and you go get behind the wheel of your UPS or FedEx or Amazon truck, the idea that you would be responsible for your opinions outside of work is just something that I don't think existed in a pre-social media era.
Yeah, and I think
And I
that's
think it's something that we've gotten wrong,
Mhm.
and we need to fix, and we need to address and change the precedent on.
And I think that's cancel culture. The net is so massive at this point that it's purposely made that way because it wants to catch as many people as possible. And by the way, really, I think, you standing tall mattered. But also, we saw Stephen King and Scarlett Johansson just buckle and backpedal when they were attacked. And, if my thinking is, if someone of that stature, if they can't stand tall, what chance do I have? And I think that really sends a terrible signal.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think if you are economically self-sufficient, if you're wealthy, I don't understand why you care what people say about you online. I just really don't. I think one of my character traits that probably helps me, given what I do for a living, is I just genuinely don't care what people say about me online because it doesn't really impact my life. And even people who write awful things or write things that are untrue, it's still a form of advertising. Because what I found is the number of people that I meet who say, man, I heard about you because so and so said something awful about you. And I clicked on your Twitter profile. I went and started listening to some of the things that you were saying. We have this idea, and I think the cancel culture universe in particular has it, that whatever they say is going to be the predominant result, right? If they hate you, then everybody's going to hate you. I actually think it's the opposite now. I mean, look at what's happened of late with Jason Aldean, and try that in a small town. It's legitimately the biggest radio hit on Billboard's Hot 100 of his entire career. Now, I think even he would say this is nowhere near the best song that I've ever written or the best song that I've ever sang. But the negative attention from the cancel culture community is so powerful in terms of drawing attention that actually a ton of people who would have never heard that song heard it and supported it because they were trying to cancel him. And I think that's actually the way we're seeing things spin back in an opposite direction now.
Yeah, I think it's a very positive sign. I was reading American Playbook and I thought, gosh, it sounds a lot like Private Parts, the Howard Stern story, because you fought back, you said what you wanted to say, it got more attention, the powers that be were ready to kind of smite you for doing just that. You grew up listening to Howard Stern. I did as well. And hearing him either be silent on free speech or saying bleep your freedom has been crushing to me. Why do you think not only just Howard Stern, but why did the left backpedal on free speech? I mean, I think we can look back in 20, 30 years and be shocked by that switch. What's going on? What do you think happened?
Yeah, there's a piece in the book where I feature the very first thing that I ever published, which was a letter to the editor at my local college at George Washington University defending the principles of free speech. And I read that recently. I was 18. Someone sent it to me. It's now in the book. But I think about how crazy it was. I mean, if you go back in time to, let's say, the time when I was in college, Bill Maher was getting canceled for saying that whatever you want to say about the 9/11 terrorists, they weren't cowards, since the definition of cowardice does not encompass being willing to die for what you believe in. And he wasn't saying they were good people for certain, or that there wasn't, a just dessert waiting for them in the afterlife. But just that being willing to die for what you believe in is not cowardice. They canceled Politically Incorrect, which was a show that entirely existed to have opinions that might be considered politically incorrect. And I look at that now, and I think if Bill Maher were talking to us right now, he would say 20 some odd years later, what we've seen is a fundamental reshaping of free speech. And even you don't have to focus just on Bill Maher. I mean, if you remember the movie The People versus Larry Flint, the idea was that this pornographer, Larry Flint, was a First Amendment warrior attacking, if I remember, Jerry Falwell with a satirical and hyperbolic address about his upbringing, and that we should have a robust and uninhibited space for which public figures could be ridiculed that did not allow them to sue for massive compensation. And the hero of The People versus Larry Flint was this left-wing pornographer who believed in free speech. And it's just wild to me to think about by the way, you can say the same thing about the ACLU, which went to war to ensure, and war is obviously a figurative sense there, but went to legal war to ensure that Nazis were able to march in Skokie, Illinois. And now they seem in many ways to have adopted the concept of if words hurt your feeling, they should be restricted in many ways. And so I hesitate at times to say that I know where the world is going to go 20 years from now, because I never would have predicted where we are now. But what I would say in general is I've stayed consistent. What disappoints me is that the Howard Sterns of the world have not.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to stand on principle over politics. And it's staggering to me how few people actually agree with that.
And Bill Maher keeps saying, I've stayed the same. I've stayed the same. It's everyone else who's pulling in different directions.
I really do think, Christian, I haven't changed hardly at all. I think the world has spun insanely around me. But what I believe in and the principles I stand for in terms of robust, uninhibited free speech, it used to be a quote unquote liberal proposition, and now it's a conservative one. And I haven't changed at all.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know if it's available for rent or streaming, but Skokie was, I believe, a TV movie with Danny Kaye about the case you just mentioned. It must seem like an artifact to watch it now because all the sides have changed. We're seeing things like Sound of Freedom, try that in a small town. And of course, this new song, Rich Men North of Richmond. Do these pop culture victories matter in the big picture? Conservatives are cheering them. It's good headlines, great stories. But do they reflect something powerful, and can they impact the electorate? Because your book is all about winning in 2024.
I do think they reflect something significant. And I think it's that this whole woke ideology, cancel someone who has an opinion I don't like, actually isn't embraced by anybody, from a pure percentage perspective. White, Black, Asian, Hispanic, I think overwhelmingly gay, straight, men, women reject the idea of trying to cancel people all the time. And I actually think what it represents is an overlooked segment of the country that actually is willing to change their behaviors, but it's not left-wing boycotts. I mean, you may be able to think of one. Can you think of a left-wing boycott that has actually worked in terms of people not consuming a product?
I mean, Chick-fil-A was the opposite reaction, I thought.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And certainly you can say Bud Light. You can say Disney, which I think is in the midst of its own version of this. It's actually not only that, and Jason Aldean is the exact opposite of that. Woke boycotts actually lead to more success. I wish somebody would try to boycott my book. It's the best thing that could happen to it. And in fact, conservative buying decisions lead to success or failure. And by the way, I think this is important too, because some people say, oh, Bud Light is counter cancel culture on the other side. I think it's a fundamental misapprehension of what cancel culture is. If you come out and you say, hey, I think this movie sucks, no one should go see it, that isn't cancel culture. That is your opinion of a movie that you went to go see, and you're using your word of mouth to say whether you think people should spend their time or money going to consume a product, to watch a movie, to buy a drink. Not choosing to buy something because you feel like the company takes you for granted is actually just the marketplace working. And I think there's a big difference between, hey, this person doesn't deserve to have an opinion, right? There's a difference between the marketplace of ideas and cancel culture. And I write about this a lot in the book. But the difference between, to me, a dispute in the marketplace of ideas, this is good, this is bad, let's argue about it. Cancel culture takes a step beyond and says, not only does your opinion wrong, but you don't deserve the right to be able to make a living anywhere while having that opinion.
Yeah, and that's a massive distinction.
That is a big difference.
Yeah. American Playbook calls out China, and it shares that great story about how they tried to make a Red Dawn remake, and of course they had to change the villains from the Chinese to North Koreans. It's a classic, and it just says everything about Hollywood. But, next year, you're talking about the landslide you want for the Republicans. Hollywood's going to be all against you. It's going to put everything they possibly have. I'm sure the late night TV shows will be back. You're going to have lots of movies, documentaries to smite the GOP nominee. How do Americans fight back against that beyond not going to that movie or not watching that show? Is there anything else they can do to kind of counteract that Hollywood messaging?
Well, I think it's to say that you don't hate everything in Hollywood. I did a radio segment the other day. I don't know if you watch or have watched The Righteous Gemstones, the Danny McBride movie. I have no idea what Danny McBride's politics are. He might hate me. He might hate Outkick. He may well have no idea about anything that we do. But the show's really funny. And I think conservatives have long been used to understanding the difference between liking content and liking the underlying actor.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say has changed a lot in the social media age is, as a kid, when an actor or actress got up on the stage at the Oscars and lectured us about politics, everybody rolled their eyes and collectively. And we just said, okay, so-and-so is concerned about about whatever it is, the situation with the whales, right? Or Greenpeace or something like that. They would have these long, drawn out political statements, and people would just say, okay, it's an actor or actress. They may or may not have decent political opinions, but I can like a movie. And what I would say is, don't fight them. I mean, I really do believe that there's a huge opening in the world of comedy in particular for a Republican candidate who comes out and says, you know what? I think Dave Chappelle's really funny. I really enjoyed the most recent Chris Rock speech or comedy stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, The Righteous Gemstones, very funny movie. Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm's objectively funny. And that doesn't mean that they may not have left-wing leanings, but I don't have a problem with somebody disagreeing with me politically if they can make me laugh. And that's where I would tell Republicans to lean into. It does, and by the way, I think there's a ton of underground support for right-leaning candidates. Trump kind of really camouflages a lot of that, but I think there are a ton of people who tell jokes for a living that believe that this entire cancel culture universe is ridiculous. And I think the right Republican candidate would actually open up a huge window into conservative Hollywood that's a little bit under the radar, almost hidden, like back in the day, you had to be hidden if you were gay.
Yeah.
Because you weren't allowed to be public with your heterosexual or your homosexuality. I think there's a lot of people out there who have red-leaning political beliefs that are afraid to come out. And I think a candidate who embraces jokes, humor, creativity in general could be very substantially embraced. I really do.
And the comedians I speak to are often attacked the most by fellow comedians, which is shocking to me.
Oh, yeah.
So they'd be ripe for the plucking as far as an audience. Now, I've been thinking about this next question for a long time, and I really wanted to speak to someone of your stature to get an answer, because I don't even know if there is one. But the mainstream media is corrupt beyond everyone's imagination. But plenty of our friends on the left, and I'm talking about my wife, who's a Bernie bro, they believe every word that they read in the press. How do we change that? Because I think if we don't wake up enough of those people who are smart and sane and decent and kind, I think we're in trouble. And I think that all the optimism you have in your book, which is well-founded, I find it hard to see it when I think about people like my wife who don't understand that Dr. Fauci isn't a saint. And how do we break through them? Because they're not evil, they're not ill thought. They just are believing a press that no longer is honest.
Well, it's such a good question, and I think about it all the time. And I feel fortunate that I have Outkick, and that I have Clay and Buck, and that I have Fox News, and then I have this book coming out. I really do think you have to win over one person at a time. I think these landslide moments are challenging to find. And I think you have to find people who are persuadable. And I put myself in this category because I was willing to change opinions. I bet you put yourself in that category. And I actually think there are a lot of them, and they decide elections. And so I think at minimum, you have to start off understanding that basically we're in a 45-45 country. And there's about 10% of people out there that are persuadable. And the positive is, to win a proverbial landslide, you only need to get like 53% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And that 6-point win would be seismic. And then as you govern, you make it clear to people that their perceptions of you are not reflected by the reality of you. And I think it can happen. I really do. I think there's a desperate craving in America for a return to the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s when, by and large, many people got along. And I think it's a multi-ethnic. I think it's a gay straight. I think there are a lot of these so-called identities that the Democrats want to argue divide us that actually don't, and that we cross lines, and most people have way more in common than they do different. And I think I'll give you a quick example here. My audience leans red now, right? But I put up 2 questions recently. I said, "Hey, who would you vote for, RFK Jr. or Mitt Romney, RFK Jr. or Mike Pence?" RFK Jr. won 75-25 over Pence, 79-21 over Mitt Romney. Why is that?
Yeah,
I think there's a desperate. Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. There's a desperate craving for honesty.
Yeah.
People don't want someone who tells them that they agree with them on everything. They want someone who's just going to be honest to them and be authentic. And so I think there's an establishment versus anti-establishment aspect to this. And that's why I'm cautiously optimistic that at some point this whole identity politics, cancel culture universe is going to explode and blow up on itself, because I really do think that's where we're headed.
Yeah. One last question, Clay. Conservatives have done a pretty bad job in the past of embracing pop culture, of course, creating pop culture. That's changing. The Daily Wire's gone Hollywood. Blaze TV's got some interesting things going on. What else would you like to see in this space that maybe is not there right now? Something ripe for the picking, another type of story, another type of movie, anything creatively speaking. What more is out there that we should embrace, that we should create to kind of keep that momentum going?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would point out how many movies are not woke. And I'll just give you an example that I wrote about in the book. Tom Cruise and Top Gun Maverick. Why did it do so well? I think people go to the movies to escape politics. Mm-hmm. And I don't even think you have to have overt conservative, so to speak, programming. I think you just have to have normal programming, right? I mean, and the Tom Cruise success, I think, of Top Gun Maverick speaks very well to that. I think even the failure of the recent Indiana Jones movie, look, I didn't hate it, but they tried to change the overall characterization of it in the same way that they did Star Wars. I don't think there's anything wrong with timeless movies that connect across generational lines. In fact, I think people go to the movies to escape serious things in their life, and I think they don't want overt agendas. So I don't think you have to have a conservative agenda or a liberal agenda. I think you just have to tell stories well.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the audience wants more than anything.
I think Top Gun Maverick was so apolitical, it was quietly political. That's a subject for another day.
Well, that's its own story. But yes, I mean, to the extent that you can avoid getting sucked into having to have a political take in any way in a movie, I think is a recipe for tremendous success.
Yep, I agree. Well, Clay, thank you so much for joining the Hollywood in Total podcast. Everyone should grab Clay's American Playbook as the perfect way to prepare for the 2024 campaign. It will be ugly. It will be bruising. But, of course, best of all, one thing I liked about the book, a lot of life lessons in here. Also a little bit about writing, which actually spoke to me personally. But between that play calling, got some really good, informative things that you can pass on to your kids. So I really appreciate that. But, of course,
I appreciate that. I hope people are entertained. That's the goal.
Sure. Well, absolutely. But also, listen to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show, weekdays at noon Eastern Time, in the Grand Rush Limbaugh tradition. Clay, keep up the great work, and I hope Republicans not only read your book, but they take a lot of notes. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Keep up the good work.
All right, well said. Thank you so much, Clay. And by the way, if you ever need a Hollywood commentator for the show, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been on Prager, Corolla, Dennis Miller, you name it. So always available to help if that helps out.
Yeah, no, 100%. We'll get you on at some point for sure.
Thanks, Clay. Take care.
Appreciate it, man.
Best luck. Bye.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, before we wrap up, I wanted to brag a little bit. I can predict the future. Now, I don't know how many runs the Yankees will lose by on any given night. Please let this season end, please. But I can predict parts of the future. If an artist generates some love from the heartland, from conservatives, the media will pounce and seize on their success. Guaranteed. Just ask Jason Aldean how that works. But now, it's an unknown singer from Virginia, and it's his turn to feel the heat. His crime? Well, he made a lot of people happy. The singer, I think you know the name now, is Oliver Anthony. And he's a literal overnight success story. Maybe 48 hours, but I think close enough. All thanks to a song called Rich Men North of Richmond. It's a great protest anthem. It's sung with heart and guts. You got to watch the video just to see him perform it. Now, the media has been ignoring the song and Anthony for a while now, despite it absolutely crushing on social media, which they seem to care about in most cases, and also the iTunes charts. It's just an incredible success story. You couldn't make a movie and make it believable like this. It'd be too outrageous, but it's happening. But reporters mostly ignored this story because it doesn't align with their narratives. But slowly they're starting to come around. They're starting to report on it. So how are they doing it? Well, what's the framing? Is it this overnight sensation? Is it this incredible story? This humble soul who gave up drinking and found God? Are any of those angles in play? Oh, no. It's conservatives are sharing his music. It's practically what they're saying in unison. It's amazing. The same playbook. With all apologies to Clay Travis. But here's the scary part. Now, Anthony says he's nonpartisan. There's nothing overtly political in his music so far, so let's just take him at his word. But just the whiff that the right likes his music, likes his songs, likes his lyrics, well, the media had to sick their dogs at him. Except they came up empty. I'll share more about that in a second. Here's Variety magazine. Variety! Admitting as much. Here's part of their story, belated story, on the sensation. Oliver Anthony is a nom de plume. Still, nothing that turns up under his real name suggests that he was actually financed by a PAC or major label or doesn't really know what a deer blind is. Do you know what they just said? Here's a singer, an overnight sensation, a wonderful story, bringing lots of joy to lots of people. And so how did they react? Well, first they ignored it, hoping it would go away, hoping they could just push it aside. But when they couldn't, they did a deep dive on him. An overnight sensation, they had to go through his files, hoping, praying to get the goods in him. And they came up empty. Let me tell you, you cannot hate the mainstream press enough. You just can't. Well, that's it for the show. Thank you again to Radio America for having me as part of their fine podcast lineup. And while I have your ear, I hope you'll drop by HollywoodInToto.com. Plug official. It's updated 7 days a week, and it gives you the scoop on what's woke and what's something you'll watch again and again. Those are the movies I love the best. Seacrest, out.